Hello, we're outside the wall, and today I'm here with Wally and Abeldex.
Hello.
Hello.
We watched Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation to start our female directors fortnight. This is came up as we had seen with in the past we had seen some of the Godfather movies, and with Abeldex we watched the final entry of the Godfather films, and which also stars Sofia Coppola. And I had mentioned that her director entry was apparently better than her acting entry, so this has was how it came up. And let us start then with Wally's opinion.
So yes, this was my first Sofia Coppola film. I can't say for certain if it was my first female director film because I really never. I'd have to look back at my catalog of movies I've seen because I never really started paying attention to directors until I was in my early 20s, maybe. But this is sort of like a drama with a bit of comedy sprinkled in, starring Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson in one of her early roles, actually. As two kind of individuals who are at sort of breaking points in their lives and careers or at kind of turning points, and they're trying to come out of it or at least trying to find a way through it while they're both in Japan, where the setting of the film takes place. So the movie itself, Lost in Translation, it really plays on that title very early in the film and kind of sticks with that in many ways, both literally and figuratively. So I did like some kind of that metaphor of the title and how that plays out between the different characters and the setting they're in. And definitely, I noticed some influences Sofia Coppola had gotten from her father, Francis Ford Coppola. It's definitely from the lighting effects in certain ways, certain scenes are shot. I can definitely see the father's influence. That's not to say that this is a film that's directly like a Francis Ford Coppola film, but uh, because I think she actually stands out on her own. But overall, I it was enjoyable. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite films, but I didn't necessarily dislike it. There was some, like I said, there were some metaphors in there that I did enjoy, and some overall just the different interactions between the characters that I found interesting. Exdeath.
Okay, so I happen to know for a fact that this is not the first female-directed film that I've seen, but that it is a surprisingly small minority of movies, especially in Hollywood, that are directed by women. I was going through my Letterboxd when we were talking about this to try and find my highest-rated female-directed film, and it turned out to be Shrek, which Raim then made a point of saying that he doesn't like, the big sexist. So, with respect to this film, I do think it's above average, but there was a lot of time where I couldn't help but feel that it was just another romance movie for the most part. I agree that some of the stuff dealing with the hardships of being in the entertainment business and specifically the difficulty of adapting to a foreign country, as it were, and the issues of cultural and language barriers working with Japanese people were the most interesting parts. But as for the romance between Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson itself, well, it wasn't obnoxious or anything. I did think it was kind of following the beaten path for the most part. I think it's pretty difficult to truly distinguish yourself in this genre. The ending takes a bit of a more realistic, downbeat note, so that's something we can compliment a little bit with this. And otherwise, just a pretty good movie. You can definitely pick a worse one to spend an afternoon with. That's all I'll say about it.
All right, so I know this is also not my first female director film that I've seen. Well, in the past with Abeldex, we actually saw Point Break together, which is directed by Catherine Bigelow, who is also known for directing The Hurt Locker. I've seen some other films also like Zero Dark Thirty, which I believe were also directed by female director.
Like Catherine Bigelow, yeah.
Yeah, also Theatre Bigelow, yes. And then I actually can well, there's another one that we have seen, but which have now seen by now, which is American Psycho. But we'll save more of that for the next session. In any case, I very much enjoy Lost in Translation, as Wally had said, at mostly at the first 30 minutes or so. It does play a lot with the literal Lost in Translation meaning, but there were having also traveled to other countries, I also enjoyed part of these kind of adapting to a different culture, or the clashes that there can come from that kind of understanding, or getting to past that kind of intent that you want to others to catch when you're working or just trying to live in a new place. As you would expect, it's I think the romance in this movie is quite subdued, and I like that. I like that the pace of this film, the tone is very subdued. It was very nice for a nightly watch. The soundtrack also stood out a lot for me, and I quite like that they also added Sometimes by My Bloody Valentine, which is considered one of the best shoegaze bands out there. And I very much enjoy a lot of Bill Murray's work, and I think his role in here of being kind of like disinterested, having this sense of ennui throughout most of the film, was really nice, but also still having the kind of humor that you can expect from Bill Murray. One of my favorite films ever is Groundhog Day, which we'd also seen at least with Evil Dex, and we also seen Bill Murray act in most of Wes Anderson's films. So he's an actor that I always enjoy his performances. I definitely enjoyed this probably the most out of the three of us, and I will definitely be willing to give it a rewatch sometime in the future. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts on it.
Yeah, so one thing I do want to comment on this, I didn't see this so much as a romantic comedy film, as I think Raim, I kind of am the same opinion you are, that it's very nuanced, the romantic relationship between the two lead characters. It wasn't very like upfront. It was kind of in the same light that oh geez, I can't remember the title of the film we saw. Oh, Umbrellas of Cherbourg. How it's very melancholy. It was more or less dealing with two individuals who are both at kind of breaking points. One is Bill Murray's character is kind of at a midlife crisis type of event, and the female Scarlett Johansson's character was very much kind of at she's just out of college, she has the world at her feet, and she's kind of questioning her choices that she's made and whether they're the right ones or not, and whether she should keep going or change tact. And I found that relationship and back and forth kind of interesting, especially the contrast between the two. You have Bill Murray's character, who's this actor slash voice actor who's in Japan doing this infomercial, or not infomercial, but a commercial for a whiskey brand. And then you have Scarlett Johansson's character who's here with her husband because her husband has some gig that he's working on. And she's kind of just hanging around and doing things in the city, and that contrast between the two. So here you have someone who you would expect as an actor kind of be very outgoing, very rambunctious, kind of like wanting to party and stuff, and he's very not that. He's very aloof. He kind of just wants to lay back and relax, and maybe his midlife crisis has something to do with that. But on the other hand, you have Scarlett Johansson's character, who's this very kind of penciled necked. She was a philosophy major in college, and she's kind of this very stoic sort of character. But yet, when they're actually together, she's the one that's very outgoing. She wants to like go here and do this and try this out. And I found that contrast very interesting, and wondered if either of you picked that up at all.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I quite like that the romance is very subdued, and just Scarlett is going also through her issues with how her marriage doesn't seem to have that kind of spark, let's say, despite the fact that she's very young and also her husband is very young, but he's also very distant in his work, and he even seems to have a better connection, let's say, chemistry with a past friend. So it is also goes in nicely with, as you mentioned, Bill Murray as Bob Harris. How he's, as I mentioned, he's very disinterested, having like this constantly sense of just wanting to relax. He's like bored of, and sometimes bothered by the attention that others give him. And oh, you're Bob Harris. I like what you did in this movie. And he's like, yeah. And then he just grabs his drinks and gets away. But he manages to connect with Charlotte, Scarlett Johansson's character, and as I mentioned, I very much enjoyed that. The romance was subdued. It wasn't that in your face. It builds up very nicely throughout the entire film. Even the moments where they will sing karaoke together, and it was the entire group sing karaoke, not just them. It was nice to see that kind of bonding for me.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't get too much out of that, but maybe I'm just too cold to movie romance.
I've been told that most of my favorite films will have some romance undertones in them. So
We talked about this once before. Or was that for you? And in contrast, basically none of mine have that.
Indeed, there's these. I have a bias for them, so.
And some of them tend to share a common link with having Bill Murray in them too. If you're noticing.
Yeah, especially with Groundhog Day. Yeah,
Well, Murray's definitely, I think, one of those actors who every role he's in, once I see that film, I cannot see anyone else in that role other than Bill Murray, and I think this is no exception. Just kind of how Bob Harris, who's his character, very is kind of like this nonchalant, as Raim, as you point out, when people would come up to him and said, "Oh, yes, I love you, I love your work and stuff," he's just like, "Yeah, okay." And just the way Bill Murray pulls off that typical Bill Murray kind of attitude, I think I really can't see anyone else doing that in this film.
Yeah, he definitely has a type of character that he frequently plays, which is the aloof, snarky guy. He's like that in Groundhog Day as well, although his character arc kind of deconstructs it to a certain extent in that particular film. One role I've seen him in that's a little bit more unusual is actually the Disney remake of A Jungle Book, where he plays Baloo. That was one where if I hadn't seen his name in the credits, I probably wouldn't have realized that it was him. He actually reminded me a little bit more of Jack Black in that film than himself.
Yeah, the only film I can think where he doesn't fall into that stereotype is probably Caddyshack, but then at the same token, his character in Caddyshack is very unique in general. So
yeah, I've seen also some other Bill Murray comedies like What About Bob, and well, probably most people have seen him Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill Murray is a character. It's an actor that whose presence is one that when I see him play a character, is one that I think, yeah, I won't like to see Bill Murray here now.
And Scarlett Johansson displays a certain degree of a type because when she's in some kind of romance-related movie, it's always a relationship that's falling apart, or at least notably in both her and Marriage Story, which are probably two of her bigger roles.
I've seen her, so I could comment a bit on that, but I couldn't comment on Marriage Story.
Yeah, I haven't seen Marriage Story yet. I want to. I'll get around to it at some point.
same here.
Same. Yeah, he is very much entangled with a character that has been struggling romance in one way or another. As you mentioned, with Bob Harris' character here, he has the hardships of being in the entertainment business, being away for so long. The calls where he's with his wife, and she's commenting how the kids are already like getting adapted, they're getting used to him not being there, despite the fact that he does care for them, but he just deals with also his the appointments the business is in, and in her it's the Joaquin Phoenix character is more of a person that has been probably isolated quite a while and not recovered from a past relationship, if I remember correctly.
It's an example of a movie where the dialogue around it is now going to be inevitably tainted by the modern use of the word incel.
Were you referring to Joker in specifically?
No, another Joaquin Phoenix movie, Her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, her is Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson does the voice of the AI that.
Yeah, his AI girlfriend, which is the only kind of girlfriend he can get.
Well, I'm not sure if Bob Harris as the character really compares, because I think, as I said, he's going through more of a midlife crisis, and honestly, I don't think the three of us here have gone through a midlife crisis to really kind of relate, which maybe is why both of you might see a comparison in something different. That's my only observation, really.
Well, in her, it's not as I mentioned that he's really an incel because as I mentioned, he's been in a relationship. He's just hasn't gone over the breakup. If I remember correctly, he's like going through a divorce. So it's just a different kind of breaking relationship. In this case, Bob Harris is going through a relationship that is growing further apart, and it did both in distance and also in the relationship itself. But yeah, as I mentioned, we haven't really gone through a midlife crisis to properly expand on it.
Unless both you are lying about your age.
Yeah, I'm older than I sound.
So one interesting thing I did want to talk about, or one of the two things, was one, the relationship between the characters, and secondly, kind of the metaphors behind the title and what we see in the film. So obviously, as I had brought up in the very beginning of the film, we have a very literal case of Lost in Translation, where Bill Murray's character, Bob Harris, is being kind of instructed by the director of the commercial, who's a Japanese person and has this translator in between the two of them trying to translate. And it comes into a somewhat funny scene, which I had commented I had an idea for a joke of this sort a while back. But you have the Japanese director basically going through this long, elaborate paragraphs worth of like phrases and stuff. And the translator just goes, "Oh, you just need to stand here." And Bob Harris goes, "Are you sure that's all he said?" And so just that literal sense adds a bit of the comedy, but then there's also sort of this metaphor of their relationships as well. Bob Harris's relationship with his wife could be decided to be lost in translation, as well as Scarlett Johansson's character's relationship with her husband, as they're kind of fading, being pulled apart slowly. And I was interested what you guys think of that kind of metaphor.
Okay, yeah, that's right. And you can extend it even further if you want and say that it refers to sort of the futility of human relationships in general, where your exact ideas are bound to be misinterpreted by another person.
Yeah, yeah, it's a case where also communication is in. Well, I always say that communication is key in a relationship, any kind, friendships, romantic relationships, or business relationships. So we could even say that even the movie that we just watched, Wall Street, also has a problem with communication. But in this case, at least with Charlotte, her marriage is one where she tries to communicate, but it's also her husband sometimes communicate, but they don't really understand one another. which is why I mentioned that her husband seems to connect better with other people. She's the other actress that shows up in the hotel. So yeah, it's a very nice detail how they are very much lost between one another. I think in that case, at least Bob Harris has the greater struggle, let's say, because he has I think he mentioned he's been married for 25 years, so
Right, and
he
has kids, so he has
has
some sort of other attachment besides just his significant other.
indeed. So well, Scarlett is very much just a few, almost newlywed, almost a couple of years. So it's that's probably a bit harder for Bob to grow apart from her from his wife, but
Yeah. Well, there's a bigger metaphor too. I think, and I think Exdeath, you had mentioned this, is the fact that you have two Americans who are in Japan, and there's also a cultural translation that kind of gets jarbled. You see it when Bob Harris and Charlotte are kind of commenting on the one restaurant they're in, where they're given a menu and they have four pictures of different things, but they all look the same, and they're trying to figure just order this, yeah, and then they're just kind of poking fun at the culture itself, and that kind of lack of understanding of what's going on around them, I think, also is in play as well.
Yeah,
Not just where.
one can't help
Yeah.
but imagine that Sofia Coppola had a disappointing vacation in Japan, and just that was the experience that inspired her to make this.
Well, I had read she actually does admire Japan a lot. I think that's one of the reasons she decided to have the setting of the film in Japan. I know kind of quickly reading the Wikipedia on the film that there was some backlash on this, particularly by certain Japanese commenters.
Oh, that's interesting.
How it basically portrayed Japan or Japanese as a bunch of idiots, essentially, which I didn't get that.
yeah, I didn't get that either. I think
If Yeah, if anyone were the idiots, it were the two American characters.
yes, as well, I mentioned we were watching the movie that I think that to a certain point, to be fair to it, when it was going quite a bit on the mistranslations, like the "leave my stockings" scene, that's that, and the restaurant scene with all of the plates looking the same. I had slightly some experiences that were slightly similar when I visited Singapore, where I I also had a bit of trouble, even though most people uh, spoke English and I could communicate with them. There were some few moments where perhaps something was misunderstood, or what I really couldn't know. I was trying to look for this. Was trying to look for for this some clinic or sort of pharmacy where I could get something, and all the places that I could find were they only had labels in Mandarin, I imagine. So I was really out of luck because I don't know Mandarin, so I didn't know where to enter, or the places that I did find that had some labels in English didn't seem like the place that I were looking for, just like to treat a fever, some kind of common cold or flu. I wasn't sure at the moment. And yeah, it's I didn't feel that as I mentioned that the Japanese were seen as dumb. They were really just the kind of lost in translation moments that you can find when you go to a place whose culture is so alien to yours.
Yes, just not. We're not even talking about the language either.
Indeed, it's also that the fact that, well, I in my experience, Latinos, we are much more expressive and emotional and effusive, and even when we greet each other, we're a lot more physical than perhaps in comparison even the people in North American countries like United States and Canada. And I felt a lot of that a lot more when I visited Singapore, which is that there was a greater barrier physical space, and everything was so efficient. Well, that's something that you could notice in the movie too. That it was very efficient. Everything I think Bob Harris actually makes that comment almost at the beginning of the film. That very efficient. Oh, that's very Japanese, and that's true. Something when I visited Singapore, it was that every service that I went to someplace to eat, it was very efficient. There was minimum communication needed and minimum wait times. And that's contrary to something that you go here, where they will teach you like, oh hey love, and they will treat you with all these emotional adjectives like love, honey, and you have to wait in line and you have to crush with people, and yeah, it's a very different culture shock there.
Yes, I do kind of notice that myself, particularly when I go to say like a here, at least here in America. Obviously, it's not a very good comparison, but I think it gives one a good idea. When I go to like a sushi place and I notice that kind of very like blunt, it's like here's what you order. It okay, that's it, and then they a few minutes later they'll come out with your food, and then it's very not as you said uh, physically uh, demanding, and even going with that restaurant scene in the movie, I had a similar kind of flashback where there's a dim sum place that recently opened up near where I work, and we went there for lunch once. And their menus, while they do have English, they also have, I believe it was Cantonese, and they had the pictures with the Cantonese, and then in smaller print you had the English. Well, first opening the menu, all I saw was the Cantonese and pictures, and I got originally my initial thoughts were, oh geez, I have a food allergy. I need to know what's in this. I can't tell. I'll have to ask. And then, but luckily the English was there, but I could kind of understand that panic if I were actually in, say, China or somewhere else and I don't know the language and I'm trying to at least figure out. And then I hope and pray that the person who's the waiter also at least understands some English to be able to overcome that problem. And the other thing, too, you mentioned about physicality. I know I listening to someone who's from Germany, they tend to be a little more physical as well, even just in terms of like standing in line, where if I'm standing in line behind you, I'm much closer than I would be in, say, an American culture. And I know there are some Americans who they say that they find that off putting because Americans kind of have like their own little cone of space around them. And if you get inside that, it becomes uncomfortable and weird in a way. Whereas in other cultures, that it's not an issue at all.
Now, I think that when you make that comment of the physicality and the personal space, that despite them, Bob and Charlotte, they're clearly still adapting to this Japanese culture for however the stay, long their stay may be. They still manage to find some people that they connect with, which is the group of my Japanese friends, which they go out to the karaoke and the party where they get chased out of with BB guns, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So it's still nice that they could, even with the problem here and there, they could still connect with them. And yes, as you mentioned, I felt that kind of personal space bubble when I visited the United States and also Singapore. I felt it a lot more. So yeah.
Which, as an aside, that's an interesting if it is true about the owners of the arcade chasing them out with BB guns, because we're talking about a culture who specifically doesn't have a very high gun ownership rate, and yet they'll have something like that. If it's true, again, I don't know. I can't comment really on that, other than just the observation or the irony behind that.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to comment about this one.
Um, Nothing for me. I did enjoy it, and I think it it was good enough that I'm interested in seeing some other things by Sofia Coppola. Uh, but overall, I mean, if you like Bill Murray, I think you'll probably at least enjoy this film. And if you want something that's not too serious, yet it has some sort of more deeper metaphorical undertones to it, I think you'll at least get something out of this as well. I did at any rate.
Yeah, I wish I could say this dethroned Shrek is my favorite female-directed movie, but no dice.
Well,
Still, I thought it was pretty good.
at least with Shrek, you said it was were two directors, so
Yeah,
it's partially there. So if we had like a single, would you take this or American Psycho?
let's save that for next week.
Okay. Yeah, no, I recommend this. I mentioned I probably enjoyed it the most. If you do like Bill Murray, then you most likely also enjoy this as well as I or second that. Some sequences like the Leave My Stockings remind me of moments where Evil Deck jokes that I mentioned. It makes this comment a little bit so hilarious that I mentioned a human being, but the vegetable instead of a human being or the living being. So that kind of stuff does happen. I also experience it personally because of my accent and sometimes mispronunciations, but I very much enjoy this. And if you've also traveled abroad and felt that kind of alienation when communicating with people, even if you speak the language, then this could also be an interesting one for you. So thank you then. See you next time.